So, are you wondering if we're all on the same page around what the heck a people centered organization or what people centered leaders are? Find out on today's Consulting Matters podcast. And welcome to the Consulting Matters podcast. This is the show for purpose driven transformational consultants and coaches who are ready to own the power of what they do and position themselves so the clients, the impact, the income they're ready for. I'm your host, Betsy Jordyn, and today I have a very special episode. As you all know, I have been kicking around this whole idea about creating this common good consulting and coaching consortium, all with an idea around how can we from different disciplines come together and figure out how do we collaborate more effectively to create these people-centered organizations, people-centered leadership in a more concerted way? And so I have had several sessions and we wanted to explore are we even on the same page in terms of our definitions? So, to answer that question, I brought on three of the participants from this Common Good Consortium from different perspectives from lean, from OD and L&D, and we're going to have a conversation around what does it look like around what we are having in common around our definitions and where we have different perspectives and where we can piggyback on one another's expertise. So I got Matt here from the lean and continuous improvement space, and Kristen from the OD space, and Deborah from the L&D space. So without further ado, let's get into it. So before we get started, I'm going to ask for each one of you to introduce yourselves, share a little bit about what you do, and specifically your area of expertise. And please explain it in a way that listeners who may not be familiar with your expertise will be able to quickly understand what it is that you do. And it doesn't even have to be your business background. Like I know Deborah's working on her what I do script for her brand new business, and she's probably thinking like, okay, how do I introduce myself here? So I'll let Matt and Kristen go first. So, Kristen, why don't you kick us off, and then we'll have Matt go next, and Deborah can go last.
Awesome. Sounds good. Hey, everybody. I'm super glad to be on and having this discussion. And it's extremely important to me as I am an organizational development consultant and culture strategist. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how organizations define culture, how they shape their culture to get results, and to also take great care of their employees along the way. So that's two big focuses for me, as well as coaching from an executive level, as well as at general leadership or career pivot transition coaching, another area I have expertise in. And I think that's all from my intro.
Awesome. So, thank you, Kristen. Matt, let's kick it over to you.
Yes, hello everybody. Yeah, thankful to be a part of this conversation. Looking forward to the time ahead. Thank you, Betsy, for circling the wagons with this group and bringing us together. So again, my name is Matt White. I work in continuous improvement. I've worked over 20 years in healthcare, continuous improvement, healthcare operations, and recently in the last few years joined the manufacturing industry. And so bringing that skill set of continuous improvement to the manufacturing setting in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. So I work with teams to help with efficiencies and workflow, help to remove bottlenecks with their processes and really just to alleviate the frustrations that they have in their day-to-day work. And so really it's partnering with them to problem solve and work with them on making their days more efficient and more value add.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for
Deborah.
having me. Yeah, Betsy, thank you for having me. So good to meet you, Matt and Kristen as well. My name is Deborah Masick, and my background is in learning and development, which includes leadership development, sales enablement, and learning strategy. And so over the last 25 plus years, I'd say I've built and led from the ground, built from the ground up and led learning and development organizations across sales, revenue, HR, and operations, in organizations that range from mid-size, about 250,000 to over a billion and a half. So I worked with those organizations. And what really shaped my perspective for my work that I do, work that I did also, was that I think that organizations often say that people are their greatest asset. But what they don't always say is that they don't operate systematically. So what that means to me is that a large part of my work became connecting people development to measurable business results.
Mhm.
That was really important for me early in my career, and not treating learning or leadership or culture as separate from the business, but as a driver of business performance itself. That was really important to me. What helped me with my business acumen and a way in which to talk about it was when I became certified with the ROI Institute. And ROI stands for return on investment for those that are listening. So I spent a lot of time, again, thinking about how we can connect the people investments to real organizational impact. So with that measurement side, it always starts with the why. And so I also was interested in that for people. So I became certified in Simon Sinek's Why Discovery. So I'm a certified why discovery coach to help connect people to their purpose. And I think that what I also do for learning and development is connect the learning to the purpose of the business. And so this conversation is really important to me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for all of you being here. For those who are listening, like my background, like I came out of the L&D HR OD space, and so I was in OD for a long time, and then I became a brand messaging and positioning strategist for consultants and coaches. And what really sparked this whole idea of like we need to collaborate more was working with Katie Anderson, who comes out of the lean and continuous improvement space. And one of the things that took me forever to realize in all of our work together is that there's a whole management system behind that. Like a whole management system, a whole leadership philosophy behind it. And it was like, well, why did I not know about this? So Katie and I had a conversation, and that's actually where Matt and I first had a connection. Is he heard the conversation that Katie and I had, and he's the one who kind of like sparked me to say, hey, we should really get something going, because I kind of wax philosophical about bringing a group together. So, like, I really want to unpack a little bit more around like what is it that we believe, and I want to start with Matt because I think that even as you introduced yourself, I don't think people would automatically assume like removing bottlenecks and looking for efficiencies has a deep people centered component. Can you share for all of us here and for those listening, for all the and the gap that I personally had is how is continuous improvement really a leadership system and perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we think about our roles in continuous improvement, right, what we're focused on is creating value, and working with the folks that are responsible for creating that value. And so connecting with the frontline folks, understanding the challenge that they face, how we can get leadership support, and closing that gap in what the frontline folks need to be able to do their jobs efficiently and effectively. If you go out there and Google it, it's called the iceberg of ignorance. And it shows the difference between, what top level leadership sees versus what the frontline people see, right? And so in my work and in my training, I don't call it the iceberg of ignorance. I think if we're rooted in respect for people and, and continuous improvement, I don't want to call leaders ignorant. But it shows the picture of the disconnect between what leaders see versus what frontline folks see and experience, right? And so as we're in environments where throughput and on-time delivery and these expectations get higher and higher, right? Are we equipping the folks with the skills and the resources and the tools and all the things that they need to be successful? And do we understand what those needs are? So I think when we think about people-centered leadership, I think it starts with our core principle in lean of respect for people and what does that truly mean? It goes far beyond opening doors and right the kind of the cordial passing and saying hello, right? It's truly understanding what are the things that are hindering you from doing your best today, and what barriers can I help you remove as a leader? And we want to drive leaders to the frontline work to at least observe it, go see, go understand, and show respect when they're in their areas.
So when you say respect for people, it's really about respecting the work that they are responsible for. And it sounds like, also like having a respect for like go where they are, like not necessarily just, lead from on high, but go to where they are. That's a part of respect. Is there other definitions? Like if you were going to round out a clear definition for respect for people means, what would you say the definition from a continuous improvement standpoint is?
Hmm. I think from my point, and I don't know what other practitioners would say, right? But when I think about respect for people, I think of how people-centered organizations get this right around not just hiring folks for their hands, but hiring them for their heads too, right? Like bringing folks in, bringing their creativity, bringing their best self, appreciating that. Right, a good leadership relationship is knowing when somebody has an off day, right? How are they connecting with that person, and truly making them feel welcome and a part of the organization, and really meeting them where they're at, right? I think of maybe some of you remember the show Undercover CEO, right? Where the CEO would go undercover and he'd go to where the work is done, right? And that individual would see the environment and the conditions and all the things that these frontline folks are working with and having to deal with, and doing that because he really or she didn't really have an idea, and so they have to go see to experience that. And so I think the definition for me is, you know, a people-centered organization, a respect for people organization is one where we go and we show up and we listen to learn, so that as leaders we know how to lead.
It sounds like what you're talking about is a lot of deep empathy, like seeing the world from the perspective of the employees that you're trying to lead.
Mm.
Like walk a mile in their shoes, see what it's like, not what the reports would say, but see actually what it's like for them. And it sounds like empathy for them as a human, not necessarily like a worker, but it's like they could have an off day. So it sounds like respect for people is a respecting humanity and having empathy for the way the world of the work feels to them. Is that somewhere correct, or is there anything you
Yeah,
would add,
no,
change, delete?
no, I think that's a great summary. I used to work for a CEO, and I remember when we were doing some volunteering, we were handing out turkeys at Thanksgiving, and he served hundreds and hundreds of our employees, and every car that like drove up, he knew like 95% of their names, out of
Wow.
uniform, out of right, and he knew their names, right? And after they would leave, he'd make a comment about something they knew about their family or right, and it's like, this guy gets it, right? Right, and that's what people-centered leadership looks like.
So, Kristen, let me ask you this question. So, from an OD perspective, what would you say is similar to the point of view that OD people think, and like what's similar and what's a little different? Like what would be an OD nuance?
I mean, I love the center around empathy and the understanding of the experience. To do any kind of systemic change, I think it's always better to start by knowing the people that you're working with from the very front line of the organization all the way up to the top, right? And having a real in-depth understanding of what those issues are. So very, very aligned with that. And then also, you know, we as OD practitioners would want to do some systemic research around that, right? We would want to, make sure that we have a representative sample or really have surveyed the workforce or the employees so that we know kind of what are the biggest, most pressing themes, not just necessarily kind of one-off passionate stories, although those are great to have as anecdotes, but to really understand the landscape, we're going to want some data and information for kind of an overall assessment of that, right? So I think that's a little nuance that we bring in is to really always start with a bit of a diagnostic, right? Like,
Yeah.
right. I mean, if we're talking about a people-centered organization, what are we working with here? Like, and really unpacking the different aspects of what can make up a culture to be people-centered or not. So looking at things like shared values and purpose, meaning, and all of those kind of maybe a little bit softer aspects, but also then looking at structure of the organization and the systems and processes and tools that are in place, reinforce and recognize the behaviors and the values that are important. And then who are the people, right? Who are the people that we have? And really back to the understanding of that. And then also the leadership. And how is the leadership modeling and demonstrating and reinforcing, and then, again, recognizing and rewarding the types of behaviors that we want. So there's a lot of different tools. And then kind of think back to the business to say, at the end of the day, well, why we're here is to get results, right? So is the culture that we have driving the kind of business results that we want? Is it facilitating that, or is it hindering that somehow? And by the way, what are we actually trying to do as a company? And do our employees even know that? Because
Right.
that's the motivating factor, the purpose, again, back to why we're here. Do I understand as I work on the front line, right? Like the things I'm doing, the things I'm creating, the experiences with a guest. So I'm speaking from my universal days, right? The experience that I'm having with the guests that are in front of me, right? Or whatever sort of product I'm working to deliver or service. Do I get that what I'm doing every day actually matters for the end goal of what we're trying to do?
Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
a zoom out kind of a perspective. We take that big kind of system view, right?
So it's almost like if Matt is dealing with like, okay, here's right in front of us. Like we're dealing with this. This is the real world every single day. OD takes the wider lens of saying, okay, thematically, what's going on here? So if you really want to have respect for people and understanding it, you can't go with a bunch of one-off anecdotes. Like you have to thematically look at it and say big picture. And using some sort of research methodology, and they both kind of come together. Like what's coming to my mind that I wish I would have understood, like what drives me crazy about like not really understanding the continuous improvement world is that there was a lot of things that I was doing or I would have been introduced to that I could have involved the partners or been more intentional. So when I was at Disney, like you, Kristen, at Universal, we were always expected to go to the parks. Like every GM, whenever I met with a GM, we never sat in the office. We always had to work the park. But I didn't have the perspective from the continuous improvement point of view that there was like data to be collecting and empathy to be gathering. It was more like, okay, I'm trying to see the world from the perspective of the GM that I'm supporting. I wonder what it would have been like if I would have done my assessment is if I was walking the park from the perspective of the employees that I'm trying to collect data from, like if I could have seen it that way. And same thing, like whenever I started a new consulting engagement, when I was an external consultant, every executive team, they all wanted me to, shop the, go to shop the floor, go to their floor, whatever, walk the floor. And I might have looked at it from the perspective of like, okay, I need to learn the business. But to understand and have the empathy, like if I'm here to help enhance this organization and create the results where the people on the front line are connected to what's going on in the C-suite and there's an alignment here, I wish I would have known that. But it seems like that's where the value is. It's like, here's what's going on, really at the moment of truth with the employee and the customer experience, and this is what's really happening. These are the people delivering. There's benefit from an OD standpoint is like, all right, let's get a holistic look. And as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, but both of them are interesting points of data that maybe we could, learn from. Deborah, let's add in the L&D perspective on this whole thing. So as you are thinking about, what respect for people means and what a people-centered organization, what is an L&D point of view?
From my point of view and for learning and development, it's creating the atmosphere or the environment where people and the business succeed together. So I never looked at it as a separate thing. So I told you about my desire to bring in measurement and proof that learning was actually working, but it didn't happen unless we were actually tied to the business goals. So what I hear from all of us here, which is ironic, is that we have there's some blurred lines dramatically here on what we all do, but we rarely sit at the same table together, right? I mean, Kristen, you might be over here working on something, and Matt, you might be in a manufacturing plant somewhere, and Debbie is over here working on a program or a talent or program that we were asked to deliver, but not brought to the table to discuss it. And I think that's the biggest gap in all of this is that the table that we all sit at, they're in separate rooms with our own little red stapler. You know what I mean? So if you get the reference to the comedy show there, but I think that when people are not treated as a number on a report, but yet they're treated more, leaders respect them enough to say, look, I know what we have to do. Here's what the business needs from the organization. And I want you to be a part of that. And I want to show you how to do that. So learning and development, when done really, really well, takes that into consideration. We think about, how does it impact the business? How does the learner see the business overall? And how do we make it clear so that they're developing people in a responsible way, but also they know what's expected of them. And a great people-centered leader is able to not only treat them as a great employee, but they also can connect the dots to the business results at the same time. And learning and development creation does the same thing when done well.
So you mentioned something about like the different rooms that everybody's in. So let's talk about where is everybody positioned in the organization typically? Like like Deborah, where would L&D typically fall in an org chart? Not necessarily just in your experience, but just across the board. Where does
Okay.
L&D fall?
Yeah, because I didn't work in a typical space for most of my career, but it typically sits under human resources, HR.
And where does OD fall under? Kristen.
Yeah, similar there. Interesting though, I think, Deborah, I think about OD and L&D are typically the most connected.
Yeah.
Yet in the organization I was in for 22 years, we were not necessarily reporting to the same leadership team. So in order to make sure that there was strategic data and information sharing, I took it upon myself to make sure to connect with the
Yeah.
other leaders to say, hey, I have some information that might be helpful to you as you're planning the things that you're doing, and let's get together and talk, right? So yes, we were part of the same larger team of human resources, but interestingly not under the same kind of smaller part of the org. So
Mm-hmm.
And where does continuous improvement typically fall in the organization?
Yeah, so in the couple of organizations that I've been a part of, it kind of reports up through, right? Like we've got a VP of continuous improvement, and then there's directors, and then right there's that clear path. Where I'm at now, it's a little bit different. So we have, right, so I report into our president of the business, and then right the folks that I support in operations report to the plant manager, right? So the structure is a little bit different where I'm at today. But yeah, typically I've seen it report to, right, CI folks report to CI folks. A little different where I'm at today.
But where does CI show up? Does it fall under operations, or does it fall like where does it fall into the organization on the whole? Is it CI? Is it within, like ops? Is it underneath a different department?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably more closely aligned to operations where I'm at today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
So
you
how
mentioned
do you,
that reporting right to the CEO, right? So you're
Right.
in the upper tier of the organization. So I do wonder about that if it's more regularly connected to the operational world. But there's other parts of the business that could benefit from it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings up an interesting point because sometimes there's like the chief learning officer, or, chief improvement officer. Like sometimes there is that, and then sometimes it's not. I wonder like why some companies elevate like learning or people, or people in organization development to the C-suite or in continuous improvement. And does that benefit considering there's all these other departments who are trying to do the same thing? Like, does it benefit to have one of these departments elevated to that level and not all of them? Like, is there
Mm-hmm.
is that a benefit or is that a challenge?
Again, I think it silos us further unless you have a Kristen who sees that you need to be at the table with everybody. In my experience, HR doesn't see it. HR doesn't think to bring it all together. And it's also, learning and development can also sit in revenue, which I spent most of my career in that side of it. But again, it was all about short-term benefits of hitting goals. And that's the other problem is, are we looking at short-term benefits of hitting quarterly goals? which is typically where we seem to be right now in this economy, in this world? Or are we looking to develop people long term? If we're looking to just hit short term goals, we're going to have short term solutions, and they're not going to stick around. But if you're developing people long term, connecting the dots to the bottom line, you will have a much longer growth. But that's hard for a revenue person to have patience like that, to say, oh, it's coming, right? Turnover is going to improve. We're going to have better employee engagement. You just need to give us, a few more months to let the learning work, if you
So
will. So
I want to circle back to what you're saying. So like hold that thought real quick. I want to just clarify one other thing around the positioning issue, and then I want to get into the challenges. So if we're like when you think about like the different kind of functions of like being in the different areas of like where everybody is reporting, like if everybody is so who's everybody trying to consult to? Like who's your client? Who's the internal client of who you're trying to consult to? And is it confusing for them to have so many different disciplines, sharing their perspective on how they should grow as a leader? Like how does that positioning affect like who are you positioned to help? Who's your main client? And what are you influencing them to do? And are they getting whispers in their ears from somebody else rather than getting like a unified perspective?
I think there's a lot of whispers and some shouts and some talking and some rumors and who knows, right? I think it's probably coming from a lot of different places, at least in the experiences that I've had, because there's not necessarily alignment between, for example, the HR business partner who's dedicated to a specific client group. Their goal is to serve finance. Their goal is for food and beverage and meet those leaders' needs and be present with their employees and have that local client based point of view. And then here comes the global point of view, the corporate, the broader perspective saying, well, we all should do something. And that's typically where I thought from an OD perspective is looking at the broad whole. So the challenge then became how do you make sure that you're incorporating the local point of view, getting your HR business partner on your side, also then bringing in your L&D partners so that you can enable training and solutions and programs to facilitate the kind of culture and the kind of behaviors that, for example, the employee survey says are lacking in this particular area. But how far you go down customizing all of those things to meet the needs of specific leaders, right? So that's where that became
mhm.
challenging. And then from like you said, Betsy, from the leader's perspective, if we're not aligned, I don't think we were always aligned. It's just hard to get aligned around what's most important. So there's lots of different messaging happening. And
But are you okay? So, in terms of your client in this example, so it sounds like the HR leader is their main client is the head of whatever the business unit that they're responsible for, whatever the line of business. If you're coming in
Mhm.
from a global perspective, who's your client? Is your client somebody else at the global level? Like, who's the client of OD from that standpoint? Because maybe you're just serving different people and it's not confusing. Just maybe we just need to be clear, like, who's serving who. So, who did you serve as an OD consultant bringing in the global perspective?
Mhm. And sometimes there's a level, right? So we would typically interface more directly with HR as a conduit to the
But what was
individual
your
business.
main client? Who was your main client? If
The
HR has
main
the
client
V
for us, yeah, the main client for us would be an HR business partner or the head of HR
so you
for
were
the
in
very
service of the HR that is supporting somebody else. So who did
that's
you report? I'm trying to clarify this. HR is their main client is the business unit lead. So let's just say for kicks and giggles, it's like the F&B leader. So the senior VP of F&B is the HR VP. The CHRO is responsible for that person. And where do you fit in? Or is it a different person? Because it could be that we're all like trying to compete for the influence of the same leader, or maybe we're actually trying to support different leaders at different levels. And maybe there
I
isn't
think
a confusion, we just need to align everything. Does
yeah, I
does that
think it's a
make
little bit
sense?
yeah, I think it's different leaders at different levels, but yes, we are all part of the HR leadership team and there's just different client groups within that. And me in OD, I'm global, so I serve everybody that reports to the CHRO, all the other HR VPs and S.
But, like, there was a client like, when I was an OD consultant, I had a client where it was might have been, like, the senior VP of the area, and there might be other people underneath it, but, like, my world rose and fell around that particular leader, and it really wasn't HR, like, HR was, like, that was my boss, but not necessarily my internal client. What I'm trying to get to, like, and try to understand is, are we all trying to influence the exact same leaders, and we're, like, jumping all over each other? Or are we really influencing leaders at different levels and it could just benefit from us coordinating more effectively? Like, Matt, who's your world rise and fall on? Like, who's the main client that typically continuous improvement, really tries to support? And same from your perspective, Deborah. And that's really the question I'm wondering about is, are we going after different leaders and we just need to align what we're doing? Or are we all trying to influence the exact same leaders and we're tripping over each other?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, right, our focus on continuous improvement, and I think this is a great perspective from where we're at today, is it comes from the CEO, right? Like he knows the importance of this discipline, of this skill set and this mindset within his organization, and so he's the main one, and then from there we each fall into our segments and then our divisions and then down to our plants. So that vision and expectation cascades, and we help we help drive that into our respective areas. So for us, the message is clear that, hey, continuous improvement is, it's a non-negotiable. This is something that we're striving for, and it comes from the top. And so the leadership support and the leadership engagement that we have at that level is solid here. As far as the other disciplines like L&D and OD, I think that I'm not as close to it. I'm kind of maybe a customer of it, but it does seem like there's a little bit of improvement in the L&D piece of it and the relationship that's happening within our enterprise continuous improvement team, because of some of the development that we're pulling together for our continuous improvement, trainings and tools and assessments and things like that, right? So I think there is some good collaboration happening. But I just don't know what that looks like at that level.
So I would say a really good call out about my experience has been the CEO is well connected, probably weekly or multiple times in a week to everybody that reports into the CEO. But all decisions are left to those individual leaders that report up to the CEO. So that means for me that we have multiple people, Betsy, that are our audience, unless the organization and the company has a strong focus, and maybe this is where the CLO role, Chief Learning Officer role, plays a big part. Unless there is unless there's a force or a body of people or thought around developing people, then you're left to support individual leaders. And in my world, I always tried to, if I supported one leader, like I work closely with a chief operating officer to support him in developing the agents that performed the work. I wanted to make sure that what I delivered might also be able to help the chief financial officer. And that was a way for me to get contact through there. But it was always up to the learning and development leader or organization to make those connections. And if you don't make those connections, you don't get a seat at the table. And that's why I think that if we could all, like in the future, if we could all work together to be and deliver around the same business requirements, that it would be a lot easier that way. Otherwise, you have people serving leaders doing different things, and it's all very fragmented and looks jumbled, if that makes sense.
I would add on, Debbie, to say I agree with you that it's incumbent upon us as the OD/LD professionals to make those connections to the other business heads. So yes, we're working for the CHRO, and then they have their individual SVPs, which have their business unit. And so one, for example, might be creative, and we do something great for creative. Well, then it's incumbent upon me to think, how do I engage with all of the other SVPs for, the operational businesses and the corporate businesses to determine, is that an applicable solution to them?
Yeah.
And if so, great. If not, all right, then we need to pivot. But that was a lot of struggle there to figure out what is globalized and what is clearly going to be the same across versus custom and unique for all of the leaders. And they feel that they're special and their group is unique and different, right? And that's tough. So if we were to consult up front, be the collective, and have one table where we were with those leaders, and that's challenging because sometimes they don't want everybody in the room and there's too many HR people in the room, just saying. And that's the broad stage art, like LD, OD, whatever you fill in the blank. There's too many of them. We just want only 5 people in the room. So if we can get in the room and all talk at the beginning of the year, we say, okay, these are the priorities. These are the priorities of my business. Oh, that's similar here and similar here. And by the way, that connects to our overarching goal. And now we go off and do what we need to do. But it's so rare that it seems that the time is spent to align up front
Yeah.
with all various partners. It's incumbent upon us. And if we're collaborative and we see the benefit, great. If we're competitive and we're looking out for ourselves, there's not really a requirement to do it.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
And I think, like, as we wrap up this part, because I want to get into, like, what are the challenges that we run into in creating these people-centered organizations and leaders, and I want to make sure we have time to get to that. But as we wrap it up, I want to differentiate between, like, who is your accountability to and who your client is. If you are reporting to HR, that is not your client. I mean, that is not your client. That's, like, who your accountability is. Your client is the person whose transformation you're trying to create. And if you're talking about, like, in Matt's world, like, if you're talking about empowering the frontline people to have a voice, like, there's something at the frontline experience, like, that's ultimately the transformation you're trying to create. If you're talking about global stuff, it's like executives is probably more the whole thing, and and L&D can fall in somewhere in there, but it's like thinking about, like, whose transformation are you there to help create, and then trying to align, who's doing what as it relates to that. When I was at Disney, the OD department, we were pretty much aligned to the executives, but anybody below the executive was not really our bailiwick. Like, it was the performance consulting team in the DU that was responsible for developing them, like Disney University. We were not responsible. We were required to partner, but we were not responsible. If it was coming down to the frontline experience, like, OD had nothing to do with the specifics as outside of, like, collectively what's the perspective. So as you're looking at your partners, as we wrap this up, I would also be thinking about, like, who's your client, that who's your discipline and your expertise most relevant for, and what is the person who, when your expertise is applied, is going to create the best value. That's your client. And then looking at the different disciplines, like, how do we even make it more clear that if we are going after the same client, how do we make sure we coordinate our messages so we're not giving this particular client conflicting perspectives and conflicting point of view? Like, we have one message, like, we're developing you in this particular area. So if you're trying to create a transformation on the front line and the front line is doing something, you probably need to connect with L&D to make sure L&D's training is not conflicting. You guys are on the same page. If you're trying to influence executives to think about something in a particular way, like, it's not to get the executives to think about, oh, we're going to do a lean transformation and this is the culture. Oh no, OD is over here. We want you to do a culture transformation and it looks like this, but making sure, like, if you're going after the same person, you're influencing them, and if somebody else has an expertise to influence the same person, wouldn't it be easier if everybody got on the same page around, like, here's our message, here's what we're trying to do, and now how do we divide and conquer so we're maximizing our time? Like, Matt's team is doing all of this stuff around creating this respect for people and getting these leaders to understand, just even the basics of getting to know an employee's name. Then Deborah doesn't have to worry about it in her training. Let her do, like, what she's developing. She could just reinforce it and then doesn't have to worry about it. So that's, like, any last comments around positioning and partnering before we move on to our collective perspectives on what helps and hinders the creation of these people-centered organizations? Anything you want to add before we transition?
Nope.
Yeah, good here.
We're all good.
I think it can be better, and that's probably going to get back to the hindrances, right, and the systems that are put into place. I do see an opportunity, especially sitting here with all of you. I see such a huge opportunity around that. If I think if each of us were to write out our model for what we do, like if we had a circle and we could identify all the people and all the groups and the departments that we work with, I bet that one of us would leave one of something out that we never thought about, right? Because Matt, you could make a circle, and I bet learning and development may not even be in your circle or something like that, right? So I think there's opportunity, is my point.
Well, that is a natural plug for the group that Kristen is bringing together to try to create that. And so, Kristen, could you share a little bit about like what you're trying to do in terms of taking on the leadership of bringing together the group for the toolkit? And can you share a little bit more about that and how people can get a hold of you if they want to be a part of solutions like what just Deborah mentioned? Or Debbie. I know you as Deborah. I know you go by
I'm just
Debbie
fine. Deborah's
too.
fine. I know. It's either way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely aligned that we need to come together to have a shared approach and a shared set of tools upon which each discipline can certainly add their own flavors and twists and additional customization. But there's a core message that I think we're all trying to send and signal to leaders about what's important when they're in the room where they're making decisions and, does happen, right? When we want to leave them with those messages in their minds. So even if we by chance are not in that room, which we may not be, right? That they will have a guide in their mind to say, okay, are we balancing business results, financial outcomes, the short term with the long term, with the development of people? How are we checking balancing ourselves, right? So I think there's like a common
Mm,
thread there. And so I feel like that's where if a group comes together and talk about how we're coming at it from different perspectives, um, and perhaps draws those circles. Love that idea. I'm seeing an exercise already. Draw circles and we see where are we overlapping or where are we not, and where do we want to create more of a beautiful Venn diagram, right? That we all can come together and have that sweet spot of this is the message that we inherently are all trying to send to the CEO, to their immediate leaders, to the people who are in power to make these kinds of decisions, right? And then what are the tools that need to be created as a common set of tools that can help facilitate that, right? So we're
mm,
trying to create a cross-functional group that isn't too big, so we can still get stuff done, but has the right representation of people that are passionate to get something put together and and taken away as an actionable for us all to walk out with something, bring back to our organization, to introduce to our clients, etc. So please connect with me, Kristen at chasecp.com, for all of you listeners out there. If that is something that you're passionate about and part of the get you involved. So
And I'll definitely put the link in the show notes to your email. You know, there's a reason why also that I chose to take a step back and let Kristen take the lead on this is she's the one who kicked off, I think, the Greater Orlando Organization Development Network, which is called the Good Network.
mm,
Here has been in around, I think, like 10, 20 years. Like, how long has it been there? So she's the one who came up with this idea. Now it's this thriving professional association. And like, so somebody who's been there, done that, and knows how to do it where, I'm still this like brand person over here, like that's not my sweet spot. So I'm really excited that she decided to step up because how long has the Good Network been around? Yeah, I think it's definitely
uh,
over 10 years.
yeah, actually over 20. So
Over
yeah,
20.
yeah.
Wow.
Really, it was founded around the time I started my time with Universal. That's my experience. It's about
mm.
22 years ago. So yeah, yeah.
So I've
Right.
been spending a lot of time and like I've been working on this workbook and this program to enhance my brand positioning process. So I've been delving a lot into strengths and how important it is to stay within your strengths. And this is her strength, it is not mine. So we are going to leverage each other's strengths to get this thing done. And that is actually also the hope I have as you all put together the toolkit is, from where I sit, because I get to meet people from all these different disciplines, is everybody really has like these unique strengths. And, it's like if you can capitalize, it's not even just your functional areas, but there's a certain way that continuous improvement people like kind of look at the business. It's different than L&D people, that's different from OD people, different from change management people, HR people. And like a lot of it is around the strengths. So even as you divvy up things around like who's doing what, like, well, like how do you capitalize on what each area is bringing to the table? But we have to get time to talk about our collective challenges. So we talked about how we're positioned, what we all do. It sounds like we have, for the most part, a common definition around what people-centered leadership and organizations are. I haven't heard anything that's a super big outlier. Seems like we're on the same page around that. So now let's get into what we believe are the challenges that we're all facing, because it feels like this is not an easy thing to get done, especially right now. So Deborah brought up the short-term issue.
Yeah.
Maybe if Kristen and Matt want to elaborate on your perspective around the short-term focus, and that is a challenge, and let's see if we could identify other challenges and what are some initial ideas of what we can do about them, if anything. So Matt, what
I
about
mean,
from you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think from my perspective in the short term is time and capacity, right? Finding the time to pull together, right? Some of the things we're focused on in training and development and maturing our organization and these different CI, tools and methodologies and things like that, is just time, right? Pulling folks offline to problem solve is a hard thing to do. I really try to make improvements on the spot in the work area at the closest point of impact. But sometimes you do have to pull folks offline to get them out of the work environment because it's noisy, it's loud, right? There's distractions. You're looking at work that needs to be done, right? So I think there's a number of factors, but I think time and yeah, just the demand, kind of the rate of change that's happening in business too, just all factors that just make it difficult to make progress at times.
Yeah. And if I remember when I first got into OD in the 90s, I said, "Oh, the rate of change is like, super crazy compared to where it's been in the past." And, that's like what that phrase about holding your beer, like, like, "Oh, that was so sweet. Oh, 90s, we thought that was a lot of change. Oh, so we're doing so cute back then." you know? But
That's
Kristen, what
funny.
do you see are some of the short-term or not short-term challenges? If you want to comment on what Deborah said about the pressure for short-term profitability and the rate of change and the impact of time, it seems what Matt is adding to the conversation. Kristen, if you have something you want to add to either one of those or add your own unique new thought to the conversation about what are some of the challenges.
yeah, I mean, I think honestly, people probably feel like any day is just whiplash, right? Like, where am I looking next? Who's asking for what? What's the latest, report saying from a financial perspective? How are we going to have to shift and change? And there's a lot of reward around
Hmm.
urgent, being reactive and responsive, being able to pivot and be agile. And I know that, something that I've kind of helped try to advise towards is, well, yeah, we don't want to flip in the total other direction either and be completely slow and bureaucratic and unable to pivot. But when people don't even know which way is up, right? Sometimes I think, and they're also getting so many different signals about this is a priority and this is a priority. Well, then nothing can truly be a priority if there's
Hmm.
10 or 20 priorities, right? So being able to put pen to paper with the leadership team involved from the top to say, hey, for this, at least on a yearly basis, like these are our key goals. Like we are locking in on this, and it's going to take a heck of a lot to pull us off of those. And we're going to spend time testing those out in a personal way to the leaders and in turn to their team members. So and their employees, so everybody gets the message. This stuff matters. These two or three things, like no more than that, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the hard part is everyone just pulled in different directions. Not enough time right now. Like,
Hmm.
and if you really do want to get that frontline input, you do have to take them out
Hmm.
of their work, away from the guest, in a quiet environment where you can spend time, getting to know them and really understanding my experience. So, Yeah, I just think commitment to priorities that are a bit longer term, that are you're gonna have to stick with them a little bit longer, and you might not see that immediate return. I think that's part of starting down the path of being more of a balanced decision making organization where you think about those things in context. But,
It's interesting. Like lately, I have had 3 leadership coaches that I've been working with, and all of them have saying the problem they want to solve is help leaders move from reactive to responsive. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting theme. Like everybody's like struggling with like this reactive kind of thing. And it's like, well, you can't like it's not 100% on the leader and their skill sets. Like I remember when I was at Disney, it would be no problem to get 3 days for leaderships to come together to work on the strategy. Like that was a
Mm,
normal thing. We would have like these extensive strategy meetings, and nobody would say like Disney at the time was like not a, on top of they weren't a bureaucratic organization, but we thought everything through, and we made plans. And then I left Disney and I started my own business, and there was like all the like maybe it was like post recession, but everybody at that time, it was like it would be a miracle if you can get executives together for 4 hours to do like a strategy. So like 3 days to 4 hours, and now it's even less. Like like oh we are too busy, we can't even get together. And it's like I think that there's a quality of think time. It's like how in the world do you strategize for the future and get out of reactive when you're creating the conditions for people to only be reactive? There's no
mhm,
other choice, and if you're saying we have to get short-term numbers and we have to everything's about the short-term profitability and we just want to get our numbers to look great so we can get acquired by this other company, then who's invested in the long term? Like who
mhm.
cares? Like nobody's really invested in the long term. And if we're trying to create these conditions that are setting us up for sustainable success, like you have to think about it. You have to strategize. And I think that's interesting. I don't know if you all noticed a change, maybe it's just my age, showing that I've been in this business for a long time, but really 3 days was not a problem. We would get the entire like Grand Floridian leadership team, every single person. We'd get them out of the office for 2.5 days for just the Grand Floridian hotel retreat. And half of the day on one of the days was just playing golf and going to the spa. Like it was all of that fun part was a part of what we were doing too. Like now there's no fun. Like, we don't even have like the fun relationship building stuff. It's like, get it done fast.
I think
Agree, disagree?
CEOs, I think CEOs still do that, some, where they'll bring, but it's only their leadership team that does the retreats, and then you have to have really great leaders to make it come to life and not burn out your employees in a responsible way. So I think that it's the systems, just exactly what you're saying there, is the systems that don't support long-term development. There's short-term pressure on all of that, but I think that leaders can, and they do, like, but it's only the C-suite. It's like, who gets the microphone? The microphone is only given to people most of the time that are right below the CEO. Who else gets the microphone? Who else can come to the table to speak? Why are we not doing that more often or pushing that more often? You almost need a leader that sees the benefit in all of that.
My experience with the CEOs in the C-suite, they're not spending the same amount of time on strategy. They might still go and add some fun things, but they're not doing 3-day
They might go golf.
retreats on strategy. It's still like 4 hours, like, we're going to come up with our plan for the future. You got 4 hours. That's it, like no
Hmm.
other time. But I think to your point is like the involvement of the rest of the organization, the giving the space for people to even have a voice or to be able to get the microphone and have input on work that affects them, outside of just one-off leaders doing a good job. Like creating the listening posts that are regularly in the system might be something that maybe that's a countermeasure you all could work on, is creating
Yeah.
the listening posts. How do you give people how to like that would be a question I would ask the group is how do you help leaders given the fact that everything's changing and there's all this stuff going on and you got to think about the future and it takes time to think about the future. So how do you move from reactive to responsive as a leader when you're in this environment? Like, I don't know if you have top of line thoughts, or is that something that we really have to reserve for another whole conversation? Is there any top mind top of mind thoughts that you would have around how you can give people space to think.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my approach, when leaders are too busy or constantly in that firefighting mode, is just to ask that question: where are they spending their time, right? And when we get into some of the CI thinking, leader standard work, right? Where are you spending your time? Is it value added? Is it not value added? Right? When we think of like the Eisenhower matrix, right? What's important? What's urgent? What's unimportant? What's unurgent? Right? Like how do you start to filter out some of those things? And I would say that oftentimes when I do leader standard work with leaders, they're kind of surprised at all the things that they're doing when they have to put it down on paper,
Mhm.
right? And so when we think about the value add and the things that need to get done, are they the right person to get that thing done? Is that something they can delegate, right? So yeah, so I would start with leader standard work with that particular topic and just make what they do visible. Where are you spending your time? And it's not a punitive thing. It's just help me understand so that we can put an action plan to go forward.
So now this is the whole idea around the common good is Matt just had a really great idea. I don't know if Kristen and Deborah had that in their toolkit exactly the way he said it, but now like it's a whole different perspective. So that's exactly why the group needs to come together. And I
Yeah.
really hope those are listening. It's like, let's problem solve this. So as we are moving towards the end of our conversation, I know we can go on longer. And I have to be respectful of everybody's time. Not I have to. I choose to. I want to be respectful of everybody's time because I have respect for people. Um, but if you were going to say, like, what is one thing that, if changed, would make the biggest difference on our collective our collective abilities to influence the people-centered organizations and leadership that we know is possible? What is like one thing as we wrap up? I want to hear from each one of you.
I think that, as I said at the beginning, I think we're all trying to solve the same problems. And I think that we often work separately too much. And so I think that just what you just said here, I mean, we just got ideas from all of us on a few things that helping people work together better would be a really good start.
Awesome.
And I'll add to that, Debbie, to say coming together and also sharing what we've seen from our clients that works. So when there are great examples of leaders out there doing the right thing that get phenomenal engagement results on their survey, that have high retention
Yeah.
rate for their team members, that, go out there and do good stuff and have numbers to back it up. Wow, what a story, right? So
Yeah.
maybe we collect some data since we're all coming together. We have different ways to reach into the organization. We collect some information and some stories to tell
Mm.
of the successes and then also the challenges too, like the leaders that you're like, oh wow, well, maybe not that, right? So we have we have real clear examples of this is what it looks like when it works, right? When there's good balance, when leaders are thinking both in the financial sense and the business sense and in the people sense, because they can coexist. And we've seen it work. And here's an example from all of our collective experiences, right? So
That's
that's what I would
awesome.
add.
Yeah.
And Matt?
Yeah, Kristen, what you said there just reminded me of, right, Toyota's way of thinking about this, which is we develop people who make cars, right? Look, they've got that order right. And so when you think about results, right, they're one of the best, right? And so, how do you break that down and whether it's qualitatively or quantitatively, break that down into business results. Some of that shows up in surveys and things like that, and some of it does show up in your bottom line in throughput, right? And so,
Mhm.
and I think in terms of engagement, we can't have a CI culture without an engaged workforce, right?
Yep.
And so I think one thing, just from my perspective, is how do we create the awareness of this on a broader scale, like we're doing now, and then also more locally in the businesses that we support, because I think sometimes leaders maybe just don't know what they don't know, right? And so when we think about the skill sets of OD and L&D and continuous improvement and HR and the work that they're trying to do around engagement, right? Is how do you create that synergy? But I think it first starts with what problem are you trying to solve and how do we create that awareness at the leadership level?
That's awesome. Is there anything else you want to share about people-centered organizations and partnering with one another? And I'm just not asking you the right question.
I'll just say one thing about Matt. I liked your comment about you can have a CI team, but you need to have a CI culture to make it work. And I think I could say that with learning and development, probably OD as well. It's the words matter, as you know, Betsy, and a culture is important, but you can't have that without the support for it. So
Matt, what was your phrase about like rooting where you are or something? Like you were like it was phrase you got from your wife about rooting, like doing something where you're growing where you're rooted, or what was that phrase?
Yeah, make a
make
dent
a
where you're
dent
sent.
where you're sent.
Oh, make it down where you're sent. Okay, so it has nothing to do
That
with rooting.
resonated with me too. I
It's a
remember
good
that.
one.
I
Make it
wrote it
down.
down.
Okay, so I as we wrap up, I want to just end with that one because I feel like that's what we're really trying to do is like we have a big elephant that we want to that we want to eat, but we're going to only eat it one like one bite at a time, and it's like making a dent where we're sent, and that's what we're trying to do. Is just like figure out what little part of the world we could do, how can we improve the partnering, and then see where it goes from there. And I like the ideas like we can share these ideas. This best practices work. We can inspire everybody and make a dent where we're sent. Do the best we can, and we'll see where we'll go from there. I feel like even this conversation is starting the whole process of greater collaboration because I think that I don't know how many times we've got this type of. I would love to have had for those who are listening. If you're HR, I am so sorry that you are not on here. There wasn't any HR people who signed up for the common good, and they didn't get any change management professionals. So I had to work with the people who signed up. But anyway, you all belong at this part, so I don't want anybody to feel left out. But we're going to make dents where we're sent. Thank you all so much for giving the time and sharing your expertise and helping further this vision, this vision that I had. And thank you, Kristen, for taking the lead on bringing the group together. I think it's going to be amazing. And thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to rate and review it. Pass it on to your colleagues who also share this vision. Make sure you reach out to Kristen and so that you could be a part of all of the future meetings that are going to go on. And until next time, thank you all so much for listening.